Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatore. So, sorry you haven't had any videos for the last few days, but I've been up north, in England that is, and at an event, excellent event called Kings of the North, run by my friend Colin Fieldhouse, and I met various people there, some of whom you will know if you watch his channel, for example, Jay Maas and Nick Thomas and various others. And what I want to talk about here is actually a revelation I had related to my journey up there. I had actually intended to do some filming at the Royal Armouries on my way up, but as it turned out I didn't have time. But I did go to the Royal Armouries, and I have been there many times before. But one of the great things about the Royal Armouries, which are in Leeds incidentally, which was kind of en route to Bradford for me, is that every time I go there I find something new. That's partly because my interests shift, partly because I get more information, I get more knowledge, and so I notice something I didn't notice before. And I try and focus on a different part of the collection each time as well. And this relates to my interest in Bowie knives, or more loosely, should we say, Victorian era knives of all sorts. Now, many of you will be familiar with Bowie knives and their various forms. This is the cutlery handled Bowie knife, this one made by J.E. Middleton of Sheffield. And many of you will realise that although the Bowie knife is in many times, and I know some of you will want me to say Bowie knife, but I'm going to say Bowie knife, many of you think of the Bowie knife as an American object, understandably, because Jim Bowie, or Bowie, was American, and the knife itself has, through Wild West films and everything else, been associated with America. But one of the great ironies is a huge proportion of the good quality Bowie knives, and in fact just a huge proportion of the Bowie knives in America in the 19th century were actually made in England. Now, I have mentioned this before, I guess a lot of you probably know this anyway, but Sheffield and in England and Solingen in Germany were two of the biggest blade making centres in the world, and as a result they made knives and swords and other things that got shipped around the world and sold to other countries. And this type of Bowie knife, this kind of Sheffield Bowie knife, was very popular in America and indeed elsewhere as well. Obviously other parts of the British Empire like Canada and Australia and New Zealand, but equally all over Africa, in India, and in continental Europe as well. And this style of knife was emulated in France and Germany and elsewhere as well. There is a specific type of, or should we say group of knives, which I've spoken about previously actually, which were preferred by the British. I was going to say in India, and it's not only in India in fact, it's essentially anywhere that they might go big game hunting, fundamentally. So it seems that this particular type of knife, let's call it the Anglo-Indian Bowie knife, although they're not all clipped points or even drop points, some of them are double-edged and in various different blade shapes. I'm going to call it an Anglo-Indian Bowie knife just for ease of reference, but it's not only Anglo-Indian, although it has to be said that the manufacture of them, as well as some being made in Sheffield, it does seem that a lot were made in India. But that's not to say that they were only used in India. I know of documented examples being used in South Africa and various other parts of what was the British Empire as well. And I'm pretty sure that some of them did find their way to America. And sometimes you see some of these so-called Anglo-Indian Bowie knives being described as Confederate Bowie knives and things like this. Now, I think that's probably wrong. I think that probably because they're a slightly different design and sort of than the normal typical kind of Sheffield Bowie knife, that some people think that they're Confederate or something, something out of the ordinary in American history. But I think that some of them were maybe exported to America, but by and large they've got nothing to do with America. They're very much a product of the British Empire. Now, I have a very small selection of these in my collection. There's something I'm very into and trying to learn more about, and I've discovered very quickly that there is very, very little written about them. Hey, I might have to write something about them at some point, even if it's an article on my Eastern Antique Arms website, which I'll link below incidentally, because there are articles on there you might find interesting. A couple of researchers have written about them, but I can't find anything really meaty about them. Now, there was one maker who was famous for making these Bowie knives in India, called Arunachellam of Salem in India, that is. And some of these Arunachellam Salem knives, which sometimes are typical Bowie knife shape, sometimes they're more like a dirk shape, they come in various different types. Were obviously very, very good quality. There's in fact one example in the Buckingham Palace Royal Collection that was given, I believe, in 1875-76 to the then Prince of Wales, who was the son of Queen Victoria, who went on to become King Edward VII. And he did a grand tour of India in 1875 and 6, I think, and he was given lots of cool things, including swords and daggers and guns and all sorts of other stuff. And many of these now reside in the Buckingham Palace collection. In fact, you can find pictures of some of them by searching in the online object database. And so these were high status things. These weren't everyman, they weren't like average Joe working knives. These were high status hunting knives. Now, I was very lucky a few months ago, I think about half a year ago, to acquire an example of one of these, but it wasn't marked, although it was in the style of Arunachellam Salem, and in fact I kind of thought that it might be when I first bought it. When it came to me, I found out it wasn't an Arunachellam, it had a different maker's mark on. But first of all, let's just have a little look at it. So, some of the things which characterise it as typically Anglo-Indian are obviously the scabbard or sheath. If you look, I'll just make it focus on the scabbard rather than my face. You can see that is silver. This up here is silver, and in fact if we go over to the hilt, and we'll talk about the handle in a minute, but that's silver, and the butt cap is also silver. So there's plenty of silver on there, it's fairly bling. You'll notice the actual scabbard itself looks kind of old and tatty, because it is, but it was very clearly originally velvet, I think in black or very dark green, it's hard for me to tell. But the velvet, the kind of fluffy bit of the velvet has rubbed off and just left the kind of tatty fabric underneath. Maybe I'll get that restored, maybe I won't. I kind of like that it's there and you can see what was original. Now the grip, you will very quickly notice that the grip is ivory. There's no ifs or buts about it. That is 100% absolute surety. Elephant ivory. So buy your antique elephant ivory and now while you can, because obviously the laws are changing soon. But there we go, that is a part of an elephant ivory tusk, as was common in 19th century India to make things of elephant tusk. Now, onto the blade. The blade is somewhat interesting because the blade, as you will see, is kind of like a dirk. It is double-edged, and it's double-edged, symmetrical, fairly large. I think it's about a 10-11 inch blade. Nice flattened diamond cross-section. But there is one characteristic feature which we find on a lot of Anglo-Indian knives, and you will notice a lot of people find this really ugly, I know. I won't say that I find it beautiful, but I find it interesting. This specific kind of very particular style of guard that has almost a disc in the centre and then two little lugs sticking out. Sometimes these are in a kind of reversed S shape, sometimes they have terminals on the end, but that is typically Anglo-Indian Bowie knife or hunting knife. I don't feel completely comfortable calling this a Bowie knife because it's not really a Bowie knife as such, but anyway, let's call it a hunting dagger. What were these used for? Fundamentally, these were used for self-defense. So it's when you go shooting, when you go tiger hunting or pig sticking, or these kind of big game sports that were done in 19th century India. This is the type of knife you'd carry if your gunshot didn't fell the boar and it came in. This would be your last ditch, try and stab it to death before it killed you. Equally with a tiger, or it was to humanely dispatch as humanely as possible. Especially if you had a single or double shot and you didn't have time to reload, obviously to dispatch a wounded animal as well that had fallen and was not dead. So all of those sort of purposes. So it is a hunting dagger. This isn't therefore exactly a weapon as such. It's not a weapon for fighting people, although obviously you could use it for that, but it's primarily a hunting knife. Now, this, as I've mentioned, was not an Arnacaellum of Salem dagger, which I had initially hoped it might be. It is very similar in many features. The guard style, even the decoration of the silver on it was similar to Arnacaellum daggers, but it did have a name marked on it, and I suspect that you won't, or you'll have trouble seeing that. I'll try to make it focus on the blade instead of me. And just up here, you will see Austin. Now, I couldn't initially find anything whatsoever to do with Austin. I did find one dagger that had been sold in auction a couple of years ago that was sold by Austin and something, I can't remember the name, but it didn't only have Austin in it. Anyway, to come back to the beginning of the story, so I was in the Royal Armouries with my buddy Pedro, who you guys know, and we were in the hunting section. I was looking at hunting rifles and hunting knives, and funnily enough, I was banging on at Pedro, talking to him about Anglo-Indian hunting knives and the fact that I'm very interested in them and very little is written about them. And lo and behold, in front of my eyes comes this beautiful example, which you're now seeing on your screens, of an Anglo-Indian hunting knife, which doesn't at all look like the example I've just shown you, but it does exhibit certain features which are typical of the type. Notice the butt cap, and notice the shape of the guard. And so as I looked at this thing and I was talking about it for I don't know, I was staring at it and looking at it from different angles, I started taking photos of it, and then I read the description and hit me like a sledgehammer in the face. Lo and behold, it was made by Austin. So there we go. Despite the fact that I have looked high and low in the records, so I've looked on a common source I use is the British Newspaper Archive, so looking at 19th century newspapers, doing word searches and that kind of stuff, and I've looked, you know, through other books from the period on hunting that do talk about Arnacaellum of Salem and various other things related to this topic, and I've looked in, you know, various old books basically, and all the usual places I researched stuff. I couldn't find any reference to Austin whatsoever, and I still haven't. But at last I have a lead, because the Royal Armouries in Leeds have an Anglo-Indian hunting knife, all but in quite a different style to mine, or at least the blade is a very different style, and it is marked to Austin. So Austin was obviously a company, I don't know whether they were in India or whether they were in Britain, or they could have been somewhere else. Not Austin, Texas, before anyone suggests it, and that does muddy the waters when you're searching for knives and Austin, because you get Bowie knives made in Austin, Texas. But anyway, but you'll notice that the fact that it's obviously the same maker and all the blades are very different. You can see it's got similarities of design, especially the butt cap and the guard. Right, so I'm very happy essentially to have finally found one lead about the maker of my very nice dagger there. But before I go, I'm just going to give you a fleeting sight of something else which I'm going to talk about in a future video, which is also an Anglo-Indian hunting knife. The hilt end, you've got a butt cap there, you've got a guard of a very similar style to what we've talked about before. Okay, this one has got S recurved quillons, but the blade is somewhat different, and as you can see, yes, it is somewhat like a kukri blade, but with some differences, and that is in the same family group as these other Anglo-Indian knives that I've been looking at. Anyway, I hope that's been a little bit interesting, and sorry again also for my voice, I'm recovering from a cold, and I will see you again soon for another video. And if anybody out there knows anything about these Anglo-Indian hunting knives, or indeed the maker Austin, if you want to go and have a search and have a trawl and do a bit of research, and if you've turned up anything, please let me know. I'd be really grateful, because this is a topic I'm trying to find out more about. And indeed, at some point, I might pull together some kind of article to aid other researchers in the future, to build on that, and so that we can try and get a corpus of material together, so that when the next person comes along who's interested in these things like I am, they don't have to start from ground zero like I did. Anyway, cheers for watching, folks, and I'll see you really soon. Cheers! Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.